guys. So learning to play something by ear is a really, really, really useful thing, and basically essential if you're going to play in a band setting. There's not that many bands, apart from sort of classical orchestras, where you're going to be sitting there with written music in front of you. So being able to do something on the spur of the moment by ear, or learning a lot of songs or set lists by ear, is just a really, really useful tool. Now, there are certain people that are gifted with something that's called perfect pitch, and not many of us have it. This is the ability to identify any given note in any given circumstance without any sort of reference at all, and sort of be able to identify it and play it, and you know, we can just can only hope that we may be born with this. There are some people that believe you can develop this, but I don't think it's something that you can sort of develop if you're not born with it, really. What we can develop is what's called relative pitch, which is essentially the same thing. It's being able to identify any given note, but with a starting reference point. So if I have let's say a low E, and then another note is played somewhere on the bass, from that reference note, I should be able to identify what those notes are. Now, this is just something that you need to work on, you need to develop. It takes time to recognize intervals. What I do find useful with this is to take any bass line that I know already and work out what the intervals are on that. So, say if you've got a bass line that's like a walking bass, or whatever, then you've already got a nice major third there, a fifth, a sixth, and a dominant seventh. So being able to identify them from a root note is really useful. So yeah, I mean, for interval training, it's just something to work on. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. What I like to do when I'm learning songs, if I've been to a few auditions and I've been given a long set list, and I like to be able to go to an audition knowing that I can play any one of those songs. Now, that takes a lot of work, especially if you've got a very short time frame. So what I tend to do is, rather than getting fixated on the first song on the list and getting that down absolutely perfectly, but not being able to play any single one of the other songs on the list, I like to get a broad overview of all the songs, and maybe not play them all perfectly, but be able to go into that room knowing that any given song I can play something along to it at least. In my view, that kind of gives a band a better starting point with me as a bass player, that we can go and actually play the songs. They may not be absolutely perfect, we can play any one of those songs, rather than me just being able to go along, play one song, and then sit out the rest of the set. So what I do with that is, I mean, if I get really stuck, I look it up on the web, find some music, and learn it from that. But I prefer to. My learning pattern generally is faster learning by ear than learning from reading music. It's just my preference. It's what I find easier, and you'll find that's different for you. But what I do with that is get a general, broad overview of any given song, mostly the chord structure of it. And that's normally finding a starting point, the key center, and then working out roughly what the chord sequence is. Doesn't matter what the bass line is doing specifically. If you've got the chord sequence down, at least you can have those root notes underneath it, which is the basics of the bass line. Once you've got that down, you can start listening out for what the bass line is actually doing around those chords, and having that structure underneath is a lot easier. So it's difficult to demonstrate without learning a song completely from scratch, but there's a bass line that I would have put under essential bass lines, which is Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. We all know the song. It's, a classic, and it's got this epic bass line that's really prominent in the track. And what's good about that is that it repeats a lot. When you're learning a bass line, something that repeats a lot is useful, because once you've learnt the first bit, you've learnt quite a lot of the song. always a joy when you're learning a huge long set list. So for this one, where I would start with that, I mean, I've known this bass line for many, many years, but if I was learning from scratch, that dominant 3 E's would be my starting point, not necessarily the starting point, which is actually on the A, with that walk down. Finding that point gives me a good reference point for the rest of the song, because that walk up is the start of the minor pentatonic scale. So you've got really prominent minor third and a really prominent fourth, and that sort of gives you pretty much that whole first section. So working between the A and the E, you've got that section. Now where it gets more tricky is when you get to the second section, sort of the bridge section, I suppose, which is and if I was learning that from scratch, where I'd start with that is from where I finished on the previous bit. So the A, we're going up to this C. Now from there I would listen, and that's a higher pitch, so you could identify that as a minor third from the A, or if you're not quite that developed yet, you could just go, just work up the notes until you find that starting point. And then we've got, it sounds more complex, but it's not that bad really. So what I would work out before all the fiddly bits is for that first section, the chromatics on that bit. So for that last section, working on the A, you should hopefully still have a reference note in your head of that A being our very first starting note, and then we again work up the chromatics on that and back down to the E. So it's probably not explained very well, but what I'm listening out for there is where the pitch of the bass line is going. Are we going up? Are we going down? Is it quite a dramatic jump? Sometimes if it's a more dramatic jump, it's actually easier to identify. If we're going up all the way up an octave, then octaves are quite easy to recognize. A nice fifth is quite easy to recognize, and the thirds are again an easy interval. Now the short little chromatic runs are not too bad, because what we'll naturally do when we're learning a bass line is do that chromatic run up anyway to find where the notes are. It's really difficult to sort of vocalize the thought process in this, but I think that's sort of where I'm coming from, is like to get a very basic structure of the song down, and then sort of fill in the blanks around that, yeah, sort of work from there. Do ask any questions in the comments below, because I don't know that I've explained this brilliantly well today, but hopefully that gives you some sort of food for thought. All I recommend really to finish off with is find a song that you love. Start with some simple ones, something with just a running bass line, and something very simple like that, and work that out and get some of those intervals into your head and what they sound like, and then start working on some more complicated ones. Always give yourself a challenge. There's some bass lines that I loved when I first started playing, and they just sounded so complex and beyond what my capabilities were that I didn't attempt them for years. And when I did finally come around to them, because of all the other stuff I've been learning, finally they kind of made sense in my head, and I could play what I wanted to play. Yeah, it's just sort of a slow process working up to it, and sort of getting those notes into your head. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense to people out there, and it gets you learning some songs.